Hello, this is the podcast ADHD Focus, your host, David Pomeroy. And today we have a specifically unique and I think you'll find very helpful topic of parent teacher relationships, parent school relationships when your child has ADHD. And my guest today is Frances Coppa. She's an ADHD and executive function coach based in Seattle, up in my neck of the woods. She helps adults, students, and parents develop personalized strategies to enhance their focus, productivity, and well being, fostering growth and peace of mind. And peace of mind certainly is something with which all of us with ADHD can use more of.
Totally. Thank
Frances,
you.
welcome to the program.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So we're going to be talking about the parent-teacher relationship because that's certainly kids with ADD in school, one sometimes where it shows up the most. How is it that you got to that area of work? What's your background?
Well, my background is in education. I've worked in elementary schools from after getting a master's in teaching and worked in and then became a principal. I was in special education as well. So the root of my work is a passion for
Yeah.
education. And then I have two kiddos myself, and through their journey in education, and especially two girls who were diagnosed with ADHD, the I learned a lot about how to advocate for them, how to collaborate and build connections, and how to best explain, how they operate and what they need.
Mhm.
So pairing that passion of buy-in for education and experience in the schools with my own private journey led me here.
Mhm. Great. And certainly there's more emphasis, thank goodness, that girls with ADHD, often inattentive ADHD, fly under the radar and they
Mm.
don't have the same kind of warning things that make it easier for boys to be identified. I kind of think of it as actually one doc in this area did a video interviewing teens about their ADD, and he asked some of the girls, would the teacher know you weren't paying attention? Well, no, I'm looking at her.
Totally.
And boys give up and start throwing spitballs or whatever. So it's really easy to see that they aren't paying attention. But
Yeah.
girls are going to mask it and uh, be thinking about four other things, but they're still looking right at the teacher.
Yeah, definitely. I
So
mean, I'm a girl who wasn't diagnosed till late 30s, and more so when I started noticing some challenges my kids were having, and then also getting teachers to really recognize that the ways in which my daughters were struggling definitely took
Mhm,
it pushed the way I was communicating with them and questions I was asking them and resources I was sharing.
mhm. Great. So we talked a bit before we started recording here about your hierarchy or the couple of the main points how you approach this. So if you could, I guess, spell out those points and then we can go back and talk more in detail.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would always say to start with assuming positive intent and approaching the school, your child's teacher in a collaborative mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's true that parents definitely need to advocate and be persistent to get their kids with ADHD support. And then another
Mm-hmm.
truth is that teachers are doing the best they can, and they're really working in a system that with unreasonable demands and lack of professional
Yes.
development and time. So, you're in the convergence of those two things as a parent. You know, going on the offensive, you know, in terms of not assuming that a school's doing what the best they can isn't just going to
Mm.
build that trust and connection with
Right.
teachers. I'll come back to this later, but connection is and like a safe relationship at school is the number one lever you can pull for your child with ADHD. And so that starts with your relationship with the teacher. If they feel like
Mhm.
you're on the same team, then they're more likely to be building a connection with your child and you.
And so acknowledging that the teacher has a whole lot of different things going on rather than saying, you need to pay attention to just my child. Um, yeah, there may be 26 kids and maybe 18 to 20 are neurotypical and have the usual kinds of issues. And then another 6 or 7 have ADHD or otherwise neurodivergent and may take different approaches and different ones for different kids. And that's a whole lot
It is. It is.
to keep track of, plus the lesson plans and all the administrative stuff and checking boxes and all that. So it's
Yeah.
recognizing that burden on the teacher and saying, thank you, you have a huge job.
Yeah. Gratitude can go a long way,
Mhm.
just to
Yeah.
thank you and appreciate all that you do. And then I'd say the next thing would to be asking them what they observe and what they're already doing.
Mhm.
They are experts in what they do. They're with your kiddo potentially 6 hours a day, or if it's middle school, high school, they know them for an hour, hour or so a day. But and they're probably already doing things. A lot of teachers, a lot of the things that end up being accommodations on 504 plans, for example, are things that I find that a lot of teachers already consider. So really like letting them share what they notice and what they're doing also starts from a place of them also as an expert and less defensive and more as a collaborator.
And then that some teachers know a lot about ADHD.
Yeah.
Their children has it or they do. And others kind of, oh yeah, I should figure that out. Or no, I've been a teacher for 20 years and I know what's best. And
Totally.
kids are just lazy or not trying or whatever. Or
Yeah.
their grades are fine. We don't need to worry about them. So what's I guess, some of the better resources and best ways to help teachers understand ADHD?
Yeah, so that's my number 3 point would be to educate them about ADHD and more specifically, what that looks like for your child. And, you can do that by sharing there's resources on, for example, Chad's website or, Attitude Magazine has things. So there's lots online there. And then, but some fundamental things would be that it's a, neurobiological condition. It's not something your kiddo's choosing. Often ADHD, kids with ADHD are 3 to 5 years delayed in some skill areas and executive
Mm-hmm.
functioning. And so when a teacher, they think of your 8-year-old and like they should be doing this, but if they
Yeah.
then think 3 to 5 years, like actually that explains what they're doing because
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
5-year-old behavior, for example, or the inability to keep track of their things. That is what like my kindergartner looks like. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that way of explaining it can be really helpful. I find it helpful with parents I work with and
Yeah.
teachers.
That perspective.
And then, executive functioning challenges are at the root of, or, one of the main challenges of the
Mm-hmm.
ADHD. And in that category is emotional regulation. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think outlining that for a teacher and what specific ways that shows up for your kiddo can really help them see what maybe like the skill gaps might be as opposed to it just
Mm-hmm.
being like can't, good, bad, because all these things can be taught. The kiddo just needs the right
Mm-hmm.
supports and scaffolds to get
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So those are I guess we're looking at the 3 things: the assuming positive intent, asking the teacher what they're observing, and which is acknowledging, I respect the fact that you are seeing my child for 6 hours a day and
Hmm.
have the experience in watching kids and knowing when some kids just are not fitting what should be what a fourth grader could do. And then helping the teacher understand a lot of the things about ADHD, that it is a brain function difference.
Yeah.
And
I guess
I
in
think
addition, in terms of educating about ADHD would be if you've had some kind of like psychological testing or neuropsychological testing, which doesn't replace an assessment, a diagnosis of ADHD, but you can get data about things like working memory and
yeah.
processing, which can
And,
help a teacher kind of see areas that might match what they're noticing for your child. So if there's like a big gap between your child's in your child's working memory, then it would explain why, like holding on to directions from circle to the desk or taking notes in class from the projector could be hard for them, and that's where accommodations can come in that really meet like needs that are there's data around.
the other thing, and what I think of that, one of the main important things with neuroeducational assessment, neuropsych, whichever, is uncovering learning disorders. Oh, this child also does have dyslexia, or they really have a problem with numbers, and just the basics of multiplication facts don't work for a number of reasons figured into that. So we can identify those specific areas which don't come up in the usual diagnostic parts of diagnostic evaluation for ADHD, unless that's specifically looked at.
Yeah.
So let's go back and talk some more about the assuming positive intent in terms of, I guess, parents, helping parents get away from I'm the defender of my child, I have to be the champion, and schools are messing up and I've got to kind of take them on, and to let's figure out how we can work together.
Yeah.
Which is the bottom line.
Definitely. I mean, in terms of what more to say about that, I think building relationships, it's hard to do that. Your kid, you may not even go to the school. Maybe your kid goes on a bus, or so you don't necessarily even know the teacher very well. So there are a lot of obstacles to that. So I'd say, like, whether it's via an email or asking to have a meeting and just like to build a connection with the teacher, can go a long, long way. I mean, I know for me, if somebody reaches out to me and just makes one statement about like acknowledging what I put into something, I'm so much more likely to listen better, try harder, and just like put it on my radar in a different way. And humans are wired that way. I mean, it goes back to the piece about connection, because all humans are wired this way, but kids with ADHD especially thrive in connection. They feel safer. Their brain, that calms their nervous system. When their nervous system is calmer, they're more able to regulate emotionally, and then they're more able to learn. So, so that's just like modeling that same quality for the teacher, quite honestly.
Yeah, and certainly the parent-teacher connection needs to be there so that the child can see, yes, the kind of that modeling of creating a connection and then being able to come to the teacher and child connection, because the child has that positive example, positive mindset of, hey, I'm going to help you figure out how you and the teacher and me and the teacher, all three of us, can work together as that positive mindset. So putting that in the child's mind as this is what we're doing, instead of we're going to take on the school.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, and just more trust, which is hard when we're more isolated or disconnected, but
Mhm.
yeah, more trust in each other. Even sharing things about your child, likes and interests, or, this weekend they had this
Mhm.
great success in an activity. Because, also school isn't a lot of kids with ADHD, school is not the place they shine. So showing a teacher both for their sake, but also for your child, like their understanding of your child, the ways in which, like what they enjoy, what they
Mhm.
thrive
Mhm.
doing. Because, when I was a teacher, those tidbits, they get embedded and then I can weave them into moments with a kid or with,
Yeah.
it's the same with adults that I work with now. Like I remember little things and I weave it into my interactions with them because it builds more
Sure.
sense of like being known and seen.
Hmm. Yeah. You may teacher may not know that this child has been taking piano lessons since age 5 and is great at doing recitals and everything else, but that wouldn't necessarily come up in the context of school.
Right. And often,
So,
like kids do have a chance to maybe share what you did over the weekend but sometimes
mhm.
these kids aren't sharing those things. Maybe if it's in a written form and that's already hard for them or
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
one of my kiddos, part of her ADHD is that like she gets super overwhelmed and to organize her thoughts. So she doesn't always share a lot about herself at school. So it's been one of our jobs, my husband and I, to like share some of those things so that, then she's more likely to share if somebody gives her just like a little a little nugget to
Yeah.
go on.
Yeah. Yeah. The overwhelm and organization of thoughts, people, and I talk to people and they mention, yeah, organization is something I want to work on. Often that's organizing my tasks or calendar or but organizing thoughts in order to be able to express them, whether it's verbally or in writing. I find it's easier in writing because I can have more time to think about it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
doing auditory processing organization as I'm listening to someone, that's really difficult.
Yeah, and
I,
that's one of the areas in ADHD that I didn't really understand until I saw it manifest with my kiddo and really saw how like she didn't get to share herself, her great thinking because it just
Mhm.
what the format, the setting, the not having time to process and how and I don't know, not that that's strictly inattentive ADHD, but that can manifest more in girls. That can because they could be more
Yeah.
internalizing. And so, and also educating the teacher that that is part of their ADHD. It's not
Mhm.
shyness necessarily. It's not like obstinance.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think, with girls and some of the things I'm remembering from some of the specific uh, surveys, some that Cynthia Hammer is developing and using in consultation with a number of ADHD experts, looking at inattentive ADHD in girls, where some girls don't think what they're doing is important enough to share, or gee, it's not as super or
Yeah.
exciting as what this person does. So I don't want to share anything because I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I
those
would love
maybe.
if you link anything like that in show notes because that's if I could screen share, I would show some of those things like Cynthia Hammer's. It's more of like a rating scale for girls with
Mm-hmm.
ADHD because there's things on there that, losing things, not paying attention to detail, skipping questions on a test, not following or not remembering the directions. Those are things that I know teachers would potentially have a tendency to call careless, disorganized, irresponsible,
Mm-hmm.
which but actually those are manifestations of ADHD. And if that's the
Mm-hmm.
feedback that a child has been getting, um, at home and school, and especially if they haven't been diagnosed, they're recently diagnosed, they've already internalized that. And so
Mhm.
understanding those qualities as needing scaffolds, needing different reminders,
Mhm.
not as a laziness, intentional carelessness, that can go a long way in supporting a kiddo. And so and that girls, especially girls, mask those things, or become more hyper
Mhm.
vigilant and stressed out to
Yeah,
prevent
yeah.
those interactions. But out of stress, they're not learning as well, or they're missing other cues.
And that I think also fits into the developmental delay that ADHD kids, uh, just their brain development, so their abilities to organize thoughts, to remember one thing and another. It's very different between a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Yeah, yeah,
And 10-year-olds in fourth grade, teachers are going to expect, well, these kind of things you already know how to do. They're part of being 10. Yes. And if it can be pointed out that they're really 7, and particularly in emotional relationships.
yeah,
And that's something difficult for people maybe to just say, oh, okay. But one of the first imaging studies, and this was back in the early 2000s, I think, looking at when the functional MRI and MRI actually got a fine enough resolution, they could measure the thickness of the cortex. Thinking stuff happens, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of the executive functions are. And they could measure the thickness of that, which is an indicator of brain maturity.
hmm
Comparing kids at age 8, those with ADHD, the cortex was thinner, so it didn't match
yeah,
this brain development level. And then same kids, look at them when they're 13. Each of them had made progression as expected. Kids with ADHD did too, but they were still behind.
yes, yeah,
And that follows through to age 25 to 30 when for neurotypical folks, brain maturity, all the connections are well insulated and functioning well, and that goes from back to front. So the prefrontal cortex is the last part that really gets all
right.
put together. Whereas kids with ADHD, people with ADHD, that may be 27, 28 or later.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's just a brain maturity thing.
right.
So again,
And
it's not.
executive functioning, they are
Mhm.
skills, and so not necessarily to catch up, but many of them
Mhm.
can be taught so that those things are forming a little bit sooner. Or kids, humans, adult, they're finding their strategies for executive function.
Mhm.
So organization might not look the same their whole life, but they're figuring out
Mhm.
what their organization looks like. I think that's one of the benefits of ADHD or executive function coaching, especially tweens and teens when they are more able to participate and have their own goals, is they start
Mhm.
to be
Yeah.
able to build self-awareness and understand, okay, for me, this is what
Yeah.
works. And so they're building skills so that age, for maybe that executive
Mhm.
functioning age might be a little bit sooner.
And I think that speaks to what I call workarounds. And the workarounds are the key, just like in technology and figuring out how to use one program or another. And something that's supposed to work this way doesn't seem to. Okay, what's your workaround?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
mine may not be the same as someone else, but it works for me.
right.
And that's where, okay, your way of organization, I don't see how it works. If it works for you, great. And you can, whether it's be on time or manage to put things together to write a paper And that's where some of the support is also some mind mapping software, for instance, where you can list things down or put them down and they show up first as visual, and you can see visual connections and you can change them. And then you push the button for outline and it's all on outline. Instead of, ask a kid with ADHD, well, just start by making an outline. By the time I got 4 great ideas, well, by the time I written the second one down, I've forgotten the third.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, yeah,
that seemed like an overwhelming task.
yeah, the getting it out of your head. I mean, if I were to say number one ADHD strategy would be externalize,
Mhm.
like just get it, whether that's with another person verbally, write it down,
Mhm.
or create a mind map. It can be really helpful because of that disorganization of thoughts that we can
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah. So,
One more actually plug I will say in terms of building executive functioning skills would be that I would love for schools to get more educated, more trained in executive functioning support in classrooms. And
mhm.
parents have a lot of power to potentially make that happen because funding and time is a challenge for teachers. But if a parent organization were to either start to focus on executive functioning for like
Mm.
parents learning and then potentially support a school to do that. I've worked with a school in Shoreline School District that the
Mhm.
families asked for more learning and executive functioning. So I spoke to the families, but then the teachers actually focused on it all year long. And we did some professional development around building
Mhm.
executive function literacy in all students. And so
Yeah,
it's not
that's
just your child and
exactly. And
so
it benefits all kids, whether they have
benefits all.
ADHD or not, or any other neurodivergence. Sure,
Yeah.
because like you say, it's skills, and they aren't just things of, oh, now you're 12, you can do that. Well, if you've had some modeling and, uh, yeah, it may not have to be labeled executive function part, but you're still picking up the ideas and ways to do it. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a couple of the ones that are big part of executive function are working memory, which is holding in, it's kind of like the RAM, holding in mind information while you're all then processing that information or adding and using it in other ways. And if you have, say, 1 gig of RAM, great, you can do a lot. If you have a 512K floppy disk, it doesn't work well at
Yeah.
all. And one of the things it's listed as a characteristic in the hyperactive ADHD of interrupting all the time. I think it's actually working
Yeah.
memory issue. People learn, if I don't say it now, I'm going to forget it by the time this conversation goes on another 5 minutes.
Oh, I just about interrupted you because I was feeling exactly that way. Like, wait, I have a thought to it, connect to that. No, I agree. Well, working memory, I actually think really comes into play for middle school and high school. So I coach some students and we talk a lot about their note taking or what they're focusing on during lectures and things like that. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they're actually focusing more on what they're writing, they're not listening to learn. So the
Mm-hmm.
demand of like listening to have good enough notes, maybe because their notes are graded or they have open note tests or things like that, but then they're confused why maybe they don't understand things, or they don't do as well on
Mm-hmm.
tests or do as well on assignments. The link that we find usually is that they're listening because they're afraid their working memory is lower. So they're like holding, grasping for the words their teacher said. They're focusing on writing them down, but they're not listening while the teacher keeps talking or listening to really
Mm-hmm.
understand. And so
Yeah.
that's an area that if you understand that about your kiddo, you can collaborate with teachers to have modifications like, the notes shouldn't be just something that like kids have to write down what the teacher says. They should be available to be used. And I think you mentioned before, like providing them ahead of time. There's other
At
options
least,
for.
yeah, at least the outline, say the main 4 points of the lecture that day. Then kids can fill in more around that, but they have already the relationship of those four, and uh, and hey, if you draw arrows around and sketch a little picture, fine, they're your notes, whatever works for
Right.
you.
Yeah, often it's more um, students think that it's the note taking that's helping them, but it's actually more doodling. It's the physical
Mm-hmm.
sensory aspect of and then listening to learn. I got a couple students to like try just for a week or so to not write words down, but just write what
Mm-hmm.
helped them and to listen. And they were as an experiment, right? And they were able to understand that it actually wasn't the writing, the things they were writing down that were helping them. It was the physical motion, and then they could listen
Mm-hmm.
differently. So those are I think that if teachers just understood that it's and that's the kind of that like back to so how a parent can collaborate, just helping a
Mm-hmm.
teacher understand that it's not even that they need to do something terribly differently. It's just like this is
Right.
what my kid is up against, and we're happy to.
Mm-hmm.
My child wants to learn and do well in this class. It's not like a cheat or a workaround. It's just a
Right.
modification so that they can do
Right.
their best.
And some of that also goes into the auditory processing, putting together, organizing the thoughts and putting the information together that's being heard is very different than when you can see that. And
Yeah.
visual processing is way higher in people with ADHD as far as the way they take in information. Auditory processing is often quite low.
Yes.
So
I know.
helping and
Yeah.
teacher understand that and the visuals.
I know when my daughter started having harder math and she would say, what do I do with this problem? And she'd read out loud to me. I'm like, I can't, like, I didn't take any of that and I need to see it, And
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of ability to explain like what your brain needs to work at its best.
Mm-hmm. And
We haven't really talked about emotional regulation. And I think that's
that's one, yeah, exactly. I was looking at that same thing, and that's a big part of it that shows up either as an outburst, which can maybe look like it's violent or something. One second grader, I was seeing, he slammed his pencil down and went off onto the floor because he was frustrated with himself.
yeah.
The teacher interpreted that as violent behavior and emptied the classroom and all this overreaction. It wasn't trying to hurt anyone else. It was his own internal frustration. And
Yeah.
that's an emotional regulation.
It is, yeah. Frustration tolerance can be so low. And I bring up the emotional regulation because there's so many potential accommodations, but when
Mm,
teachers get kind of bombarded by all these boilerplate accommodations,
yeah.
especially if they, a middle school teacher and a third of students in every one of their classes has a 504, they're just like, oh my gosh, how do I even
Oh,
do these
yeah.
things? So in terms of what has the biggest bang for your buck or like the highest leverage points, I've already mentioned connection and we've talked about executive functioning, but really understanding like the emotional regulation and the sensory needs for students with
Mm,
ADHD,
hmm.
I think can go a long way. Both like understanding that our sensory system can be more sensitive and there's
Hmm.
inputs that can be really soothing, like the opportunity to have earplugs or headphones,
Hmm.
a quiet corner or a place to go, a student being a
Hmm.
messenger so they can take a break, or like go to a middle schooler having kind of a pass, meaning they could go to the office or go to the counselor anytime they need to, and they don't have to like draw attention to themselves. Just sort of a reset, and a student getting a
Yeah.
chance to like Yeah, help themselves. Or, with elementary school kids, incorporating heavy work type things like large lunch bins, holding the door, moving books around.
Yeah, physical kinds of things.
Yeah.
And if I think of that in terms of an adult in a workplace, yeah, you have the choice to, I'm going to get up and go get a drink of water. I'm
Yeah.
going to get something here. So that is a built-in physical break, mental break from all the things you're looking at. But kids can't just up and head down the hall for a drink of water. They have to get permission and all those kinds of things. One of the more creative strategies I heard of a teacher using, she'd say, "Oh, Billy, could you take this note up to Mrs. Jones?" Mrs. Jones' classroom was on the other end of the school.
Yeah.
And so he had to walk all the way through the school, got to Mrs. Jones, gave her the note, and it said, "Send him back."
Totally. Yeah,
And
messenger.
so he got to walk, and he was, it's special. He got to be the messenger. He got to have a break, and it was very easy
Yeah, yeah.
on both sides.
Well, I know teachers can have such a negative response to fidgets because they've had, like fidget spinners that are annoying and things like that. But there's actually great adaptations to that, like the textured stickers that you can have,
Yeah.
on desks and things like that, or on, now the kids have their laptops so that you can have them on the laptops, or Velcro under the
Yeah.
desk so
Under
that they
the
can rub
desk.
that. So there's other ways to fidget that can be less disruptive. Even gum, like I know some schools have this no, gum policy, or teacher, but like gum is a great way for a student to fidget with their mouth. So
Yeah, there's some motion, and there are now some studies quantifying the fact that some people do learn and can focus on one thing better if part of their body is moving,
oh yeah.
whether that's their feet moving or they're using a fidget toy or something that usually not a squeeze ball, because then what do you do with a ball? You throw it.
Right.
You throw it at someone. But like a small loop of bicycle chain, which has texture, and you can just roll it in your fingers, doesn't make any noise, and it's also not likely to fall off. And the other is that many people can concentrate better when they have sound to listen to, music. And I remember my dad coming up, "You turn that radio off, you can't study." And that radio was my tiny little transistor radio, which was a big deal then. Okay, turn it off. He'd go back downstairs. I'd turn it back on because I could study and focus on what I was doing if there was this background noise.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't really focusing on what was happening on the radio, but there was that background.
Yeah.
That makes a difference.
Yeah, and so sharing those kind of things with a teacher, some of which they can put into play, some they can't. Another one is just finding out who your child trusts at the school and likes, because that can, it goes back to the connection piece. But, if you know the librarian, or, there's there's a, I don't know, recess person, or, like that can be a good person for your child to go to and connect with, to fill their cup on a hard day.
Yeah. And have that, it's a break from all the other people that child may find hard to figure out or know how to work with. I know in I think it was by sixth grade, for me, we had a separate biology teacher than our usual. So if the kid connects with that teacher, it'd be better than their regular classroom teacher. Maybe, I don't know, the parent could say, "Why don't you go talk to that person?" But just foster the connection between the biology teacher and their child, so that, as they say, there's a trusted person that child feels okay. I
Yeah.
know I can talk to this person,
Yeah.
and
Well,
just knowing they're
sorry.
there, not necessarily going in every single day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we had spoken at the beginning, it gets harder to support kiddos in middle school and high school because there's different teachers and parents just have less interaction and contact with the school, and also your child has to like say the things they need more, which can be really hard, especially like middle schoolers. They don't want to stick out, they want to
Yeah,
blend
yeah.
in. But so I suggest there that parents start with like either the teachers that your child already has good relationships with, so you're sort of building on a good foundation, or just start with one teacher and kind of build up understanding of what's going on at the school, maybe, or just the
Hmm.
class that the child is having the biggest challenge in academically. I know sometimes
Hmm.
there's that, like, I want to talk to everybody who interacts with my kid, but
Yeah.
that can be really overwhelming.
It's,
They can't
oh
call
yeah,
a
on
meeting.
both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And who knows? One, two of the teachers may be pretty good friends, and they talk during the day, and one of them may bring up that, boy, I'm having a real hard time. I don't know how to help this kid. And the other one where there's some connections. What I found helpful is one thing or another, um, without parents saying, I want you to talk to this other teacher because she knows how to relate to my child. That's
Yeah.
that's not a good way to approach it. Not the collaboration part.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be easy to
So
get on
yeah,
the defensive with that.
right. And the challenges are different for teachers and kids and parents when you get to middle school, and there are a number of different classes. High school, the same one. Uh, Especially now with some of them, they have electives. Well, you only have this one for one term, and then you switch to a different one. Yes, your um, English, language arts, social studies, those folks may be the same, but the others are switching around. So there are a lot of different teachers involved, a lot of different parts in there.
Yeah. No, there's a lot at play there. So I'd say start with one and build up from there and kind of get the lay of the land a little bit, both
Mm-hmm.
what goes on at the school, what your child's interaction, your kiddo might also build more confidence in advocating for themselves if they have one positive
Mm-hmm.
sort of dynamic
Mm-hmm.
and they see how like, oh, they listened to me or this worked this way. So building on success can be one approach.
Mm-hmm. And that's another the executive function, but also a confidence um, function is the kid learning self-advocacy, learning to, it's okay to ask questions when you don't understand something. And that, no, I need this. And so the child's taking over some of that, stating their needs and working that out with the teacher. And
Yeah,
that's,
that's one of the number one things I've found that I've also, when I'm working with students, is coach them to advocate for themselves. I mean,
mhm,
usually they're worried that the teacher's going to think badly of them. It's
mhm,
not the opposite, like they'll ask too much or make excuses,
mhm,
but also just teaching kids how to do that. Like start with a
mhm,
gratitude, start with a like share your goal, for example, not just like
mhm,
I'm late turning this thing in, or it's more like my goal is to get an A in this class, or I really like this class because blah, then
mhm. Yeah.
you're starting out from a place of like investment and connection as opposed to just like I need you to do something for me.
And I think kids have maybe a perception that, oh, this authority figure, or I can't approach the teacher because he may think I'm dumb or it's a silly question. I think most teachers welcome the fact and see that as you're interested in what's going on. If you I'm asked a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they see it as a positive. Hey, you are taking interest. You're not just blowing it off. Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's a positive on both sides.
Totally. Well, and two executive function areas. One is, one area is cognitive flexibility, and that can be a challenge for ADHD brains. And it can really lead to all or nothing thinking. I find that can be a theme in my coaching often, is sort of like really extreme. I'm either failing or doing great, or,
Mm-hmm,
I,
mm-hmm,
I, can ask for a lot of help, or no, that's a no-go zone. So
mm-hmm,
so as a parent, when you notice your child's doing something like that, just know that that's actually part of ADHD as well, is
mm-hmm,
maybe sometimes some rigidity or thinking all or nothing. And so naming
mm-hmm.
that, or working on flexible, like thinking about things in different ways, asking questions about like, why would that be true? Or, how do you know that? Because sometimes
Yeah.
it's just based on an assumption about something or some rigidity that they could use some support around.
And that also shows up and there's, as it's becoming more evident, an overlap between kids on the autism spectrum and ADHD. Many have both, and very, very, very strong characteristic of the autism spectrum folks is that rigid thinking
Mm.
uh, and huge anxiety. You put those together with processing problems that I'm not quite sure how to do things, and they often take it on. I'm dumb. I'm bad. I'm so stupid. When, yeah, you couldn't figure it out. Doesn't mean you're dumb, but they've gone that all or nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that just because someone has rigid thinking, therefore they're on the autism spectrum, but it's a very common characteristics. Kids there, and people have both. They have two different things to work through.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I keep coming to the realization that, in 5 years, we're going to understand all this even more. And in 10 years, there's going to be a whole different frameworks for these things because the information
Yeah.
gathering is just so exponential. So we're doing the best we can with what we know now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One, I'm going to put in a plug for it. What I think is a great approach to helping kids with homework. And it comes out of the work of Jerome Schultz, who wrote a book, something like Why Do Kids Hate School and How Can We Help Them Learn Better? Something like that. But his
Uh-huh.
approach with homework is, and for instance, there are 10 math problems. Oh, there's so many. I'm never going to figure out how to do it. Okay, start out before even looking at the problems, parents saying, how difficult do you, on a 1 to 10 scale, how difficult do you think this is going to be? How long do you think it's going to take you? And then, particularly with that sheet of math problems, take a piece of paper and cover all but one,
Mm,
and then work down the list. And then, as you get, having finished it, how difficult was it? Oh, really? That was only about a 4 out of 10. I thought it was going to be 9 out of 10. How long did it take you? It didn't take the hour and a half I thought it was.
yeah.
So then kids start to learn and get some self-confidence from it. I think it's a great approach to
Yeah. Yep.
parents and
Breaking
kids
things
working
into
together.
smaller chunks is such a helpful
Mm-hmm.
strategy. And then the time estimating, or when you put something,
Yeah.
make it more concrete, like instead of this open-ended or a really big thing, just like, I'm going to work on it for 10 minutes and then take a break.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Uh, I, one patient showed me something I thought was great and when got one. I don't have it here. It's called a flip timer.
Yeah.
And when you turn it, it starts the time. Well, this one is a hexagon and it goes 5, 15, 30, 45 an hour. So you flip it to 10 minutes, it starts count time timer. and it beeps when it gets to the end of that. And from the point I kept working and it kept beeping. Then it got beeping really loud.
Oh,
It changed. Hey, you aren't paying attention. But that way there's okay, I can work 15 minutes on this, and there's going to be a signal. And if you're really into it, then turn it to the clock side when it shuts up and keep going.
yeah.
But that's another one of those externalizing that time estimation. Well, we're at the point we need to kind of wrap up this kind of fascinating discussion. And just to hit some of the high points, we talked about assuming positive intent of the teacher, and then asking teacher, what do you see my child? How do you see them working? Where do you think they're having problems? And helping teacher understand ADHD and specifically about your own child's ADHD. And they have a hard time verbalizing their thoughts and organizing them, but they can really do it really well written, or the other way around. If you give him a chance you ask questions and he can just tell you about it, he's probably going to do better than if you ask him to write it.
Yeah.
And then working specifically and looking at all the areas of emotional regulation, which is so important and very difficult. One of those challenges all of us with ADHD have. And Dr. Russell Barkley sees the whole picture of ADHD as a problem in self-regulation, but that's regulation of attention, regulation of emotions.
Yeah.
Well, Frances,
the only thing I want to, as a final thing, I realized we did not say, talk about bring out strengths. It sounded all, so, I hear it in the, it's not all about challenges, just draw attention to their strengths.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
We've had a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining me. Frances Coppa is an ADHD and executive function coach, and as you heard, has a great approach in working with parents and children. And I'm sure if there's a chance for her to do some skill building at your school to help teachers understand ADHD, that'd be great. You can find out about her ADHD coaching and resources through www.francescoppa.com. That's FRANCESCOPPA. Thank you so much for your attention, folks. It's been wonderful to bring you another episode of ADHD Focus. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch up to you next time.